This wasn't just a visit, this was a carefully controlled royal ambush that exposed exactly how far Meghan Markle had fallen and why a 47-minute meeting at Highgrove turned into one of the most quietly humiliating moments in royal history. Because what looked like a simple family reunion was anything but. It started with hope, or at least that's what Meghan Markle believed. A return, a reset, a carefully timed re-entry into the royal orbit. But Tom Bower shattered that illusion almost instantly, revealing that this meeting wasn't built on reconciliation, it was built on suspicion, calculation, and a strategy so tight it left no room for maneuvering. And here's where things begin to feel off, because what Meghan Markle thought would be warm, personal, even emotional, turned cold. Structured and controlled within minutes. Not a reunion, not a welcome back, a containment, a message. And suddenly, the entire narrative flips.
Meghan Markle felt humiliated on Prince Harry's most recent UK trip, and that the trip turned into a nightmare, forcing Markle and her children to return home to California earlier than they had hoped.
Now pause there, because this is where the real question emerges. Why would a simple family visit require this level of control? Why would King Charles allow the meeting, but only under strict, almost clinical conditions? Tom Bower gives us the first clue, and it's not subtle. Harry and Meghan didn't just come back to the United Kingdom for nostalgia. According to Bower, there was a mission behind the visit, a deliberate attempt to reverse Megxit, to undo the damage, to rebuild bridges, not emotionally, but strategically. And suddenly, this isn't about family anymore, it's about status.
But I do think that when you're mocked so publicly as they've been, their value begins to nosedive pretty quickly. And I don't think they're finding any more sources of income. And with the stream of money they're spending on security, on mortgages, on just plain living, I think they can see the end of the road within 5 years at best. And they've got a real financial problem now.
Because look at the timing. Years away, deals struggling, projects stalling, public interest fading, Meghan Markle's lifestyle brand facing quiet challenges, Harry's connections losing strength. One by one, the pillars that once held their independence together starting to crack. And when everything else begins to slip, where do you go? Back to the only institution powerful enough to restore everything, the royal family.
Meghan and Harry's crisis, completely of their own making, is they have no major projects, no major money earners. And so they're more desperate than ever. And I think that they don't know what to do other than to try and come back to Britain and rebuild themselves as some sort of members of the royal family.
But here's the twist. They couldn't just walk back in. Not after everything that had happened. Not after interviews, accusations, distance, silence. They needed a reason, a believable one. And that's where the Invictus Games became more than just an event. It became the doorway, the cover, the perfect excuse to step back into royal proximity without appearing desperate. But King Charles saw it. Every move, every angle, every possible outcome. And that's when the entire dynamic shifted. Because instead of rejecting the meeting outright, which would have sparked headlines, controversy, and possibly played directly into Harry's narrative, King Charles did something far more strategic. He allowed it, but on his terms. And this is where it gets uncomfortable. Because once you realize that the meeting was allowed, but controlled, you start to see the pattern forming. This wasn't openness. This wasn't forgiveness. This was management, containment. A king allowing access while quietly closing every door that mattered. Think about that for a second. A father meeting his son, but with boundaries so tight it felt like negotiation rather than family. Every detail pre-planned, every possibility accounted for, because King Charles knew exactly what was at stake. Not just personal relationships, but the future of the monarchy. And the stakes were too high to miscalculate again. So the meeting happened, but not the way Meghan Markle expected. Because Highgrove didn't become a place of reunion, it became a controlled environment. A stage where every movement had meaning. And the message? It couldn't have been clearer. There is no automatic return, no quiet reinstatement, no halfway in, halfway out arrangement waiting behind the scenes. Those days are gone. But here's where the tension deepens. Because this wasn't just about shutting the door, it was about protecting something bigger, something long-term, something fragile. King Charles wasn't just responding to Harry and Meghan, he was thinking about Prince William, about the future, about stability, about perception. Because one wrong move move, one public image suggesting reconciliation, one signal that the door was reopening, and everything changes. Suddenly, the monarchy looks uncertain, divided, negotiable, and that could never be allowed. So instead, the meeting sent a different message, a colder one, a final one. Harry and Meghan may still be family, but they are no longer part of the system. And that distinction, it changes everything. But then something else happened, something subtle but deeply revealing, because while the structure of the meeting was already controlled, another layer was added, an unexpected presence, a silent witness. And this is where the story begins to take a sharper, more uncomfortable turn, because when you realize who was in that room and why, you start to understand that this wasn't just a conversation. And this is where the entire situation tightens into something far more revealing, because according to Tom Bower, the presence of Queen Camilla inside that room was not casual, not coincidental, and definitely not optional. It was deliberate, calculated, and deeply strategic, turning what should have been a private family exchange into something that felt observed, recorded, and impossible to distort later. Queen Camilla had lived through the fractures, the public fallout, the behind-the-scenes tensions, and by placing Queen Camilla there, King Charles ensured that nothing said inside Highgrove could later be reshaped, reframed, or weaponized in a different narrative, because there would always be another voice, another memory, another account to confirm exactly what happened and exactly how it unfolded. And suddenly, the atmosphere changes again, because when a meeting has a witness like that, it stops being emotional and starts becoming accountable. And that's when the silence begins to speak louder than anything else, because when the meeting ended, Meghan Markle was reportedly searching for something, some visible sign, some validation, some proof that this had gone well, that something had shifted, that the door had at least opened slightly, but nothing came. No official photograph, no shared moment released to the public, no carefully framed image that could suggest unity or reconciliation, and that absence becomes the loudest signal of all, because in the royal world, images are power, and denying that image is denying the narrative itself, shutting it down before it can even begin. And the palace made sure of it, removing every opportunity for Harry and Meghan to walk away with something they could use, something they could present, something that could even hint at regained status. But the deeper tension sits underneath that silence, because according to Tom Bower, there was also something else missing from that room, something that perhaps could have changed everything, and that was an apology. Because without that, the entire structure of reconciliation collapses before it can even form. And instead of repair, what remains is distance, and instead of restoration, what emerges is reinforcement of the boundaries already set. And King Charles made it clear through action rather than words that criticism, public disputes, and years of fractured trust would not be rewarded with a return to privilege, no matter how carefully the visit had been planned or how strongly it had been hoped for. And then comes another shift, one that feels almost strategic in its timing, because when the attempt to rebuild that royal connection did not produce the desired result, the focus reportedly moved toward the children, creating a different kind of emotional pathway, a softer approach, one that could potentially influence King Charles on a more personal level, because the connection between a grandfather and grandchildren carries a different weight, a different vulnerability, and for a moment it seemed like that might create an opening, a hesitation, a possibility that something could soften, something could change. But even here, the control remained intact, because while King Charles allowed that contact to exist, it was carefully separated from any larger implication, making sure that the presence of the children would not become a bridge back into royal duties, not a tool to shift perception, not a lever to reopen doors that had already been firmly closed. And again, the pattern repeats: permission without progression, access without advancement, connection without consequence. Because at the core of all this was something much bigger than a single meeting, much bigger than a single relationship, and that was the future of the monarchy itself, and every decision inside that 47-minute window reflects that priority. Because even a small public signal of warmth could have created confusion, could have weakened the position of Prince William, could have suggested that the structure was flexible when it needed to appear absolute, and King Charles understood that risk completely, choosing restraint over emotion, structure over sentiment. And when the meeting finally ended, the outcome spoke for itself, because despite the expectations, despite the preparation, despite the timing, nothing substantial had changed. No agreement had been reached regarding Harry's return, no resolution had been found for the ongoing security concerns, no new arrangement had been formed, and what remained was exactly what King Charles had intended from the beginning: a private meeting, contained, limited, controlled, with no external impact and no lasting shift in status. Meghan Markle eventually left Highgrove with the children, returning to Montecito without the moment that had been anticipated, without the image that could have reshaped perception. without the outcome that had been quietly hoped for, while Harry remained behind, continuing preparations for the Invictus Games, and even that detail feels telling, because it reinforces the separation, the different paths, the different purposes that had quietly defined this entire visit from the start. And what makes it even more striking is the reported reaction afterward, because Meghan Markle was said to be furious, not because the meeting failed entirely, but because it did not deliver what had been expected, what had been planned, what had been envisioned before arriving, and that frustration reveals something deeper, because it confirms that there had been expectations, that there had been a list, that there had been an idea of how this would unfold. And Highgrove simply did not follow that script, not even close.